Hello, I'm Andrea Chilcote, executive coach, lifelong leadership student, and author of What Leaders Need Now. Welcome to this leadership podcast. One of our previous guests recommended a book to me, Power for All: How It Really Works and Why It's Everybody's Business, by Tiziana Cacharo. After listening to this book, on Audible, I listened to it as I was driving, and I immediately needed to order it and start marking it up and folding pages back and re-referencing. I knew I wanted to invite the author to be my guest, and she graciously agreed. So she's here with us today. Let me read Tiziana's bio. Dr. Tiziana Cacharo is professor of organizational behavior at the Rotman School of Management and the Marcel Duchotel Chair in Integrative Thinking at the University of Toronto. Her research has been featured in The Economist, The Washington Post, Huffington Post, Harvard Business Review, USA Today, Forbes, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, Fortune, and Time. Her awards include the Outstanding Publication in Organizational Behavior Award of the Academy of Management and Thinkers 50 Radar list of 30 management thinkers in the world most likely to shape the future of how organizations are managed and led. Originally from Italy, Tiziana lives in Toronto, Canada. Dr. Cacharo, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Andrea. Pleasure to be with you. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
And I have as well. So your book is fascinating. I'm so glad that Maya recommended it to me. The personal experience, the data, the research, the stories that you put into Power for All can be applied in social contexts, corporate contexts, political contexts, even personal relationships, family relationships. I'd like to focus today on power issues in corporate life. I'm an executive coach, and power comes up in my conversations every day. But I'm going to start with a broad question. What do you mean when you say power for all?
I guess that it's best to start with what we do not mean. We do not mean that power can be equally distributed among everybody in a setting. By definition, power is unequally distributed and it tends to concentrate when left to its own devices. So it is very unlikely that to achieve a level of equalization of power. And once people accomplish or achieve or gain a measure of power, it's actually very hard for them to let it go, to redistribute to others and kind of empower others with it. So power for all does not mean that we are hoping to make everything super democratic. What it means, however, is really twofold. One, everybody can understand it. Sometimes power can be intimidating and or even a little bit repellent. You just don't want to engage with something that you feel is a little yucky and a little unsavory. But the logic of our book is to reveal the mechanics of power to anybody because everybody needs it. So for all implies that you shouldn't be shy about it. You shouldn't withdraw from it. You shouldn't ignore it. You shouldn't run away from it, but you should engage with it. And the second thing that it means is that in terms of having an impact in the world immediately around you, your family, your workplace, or the world at large, the big dynamics that impact your life and the life of others you care about, we all can understand power well enough to be able to do a little something about it. We may not be able to revolutionize the world, but we can certainly affect it once we understand how power works. In that sense, our book is written for all.
So many things I want to ask you based on that, and just that phrase, you shouldn't run away from it. I have so many more questions for you. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you something that struck me early in the book, and I'm going to I'm going to read a couple things. I don't think I'm naive about how power is used. I thought I wasn't naive until I read this. I didn't know about this, but I had never heard of Robert Greene's 1998 bestseller um, until I read your book, where you quoted these phrases: conceal your intentions, get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. And apparently, he wrote a book called The 48 Laws of Power that was actually published and became a bestseller. And what I didn't share with you before is that yesterday I was talking with a client and told him about this. We were talking about the appropriate use of power and the terrible disrespect some leaders were showing. And he said, "Oh, that book is somewhere in my office." And I said, "You have this book? Who gave you? You bought this book? Why do you have this book?" And he said, "Oh, it was here when I got the job. It's been here 2 or 3 years. It's some where is it? Where is it?" And I said, "Oh, you have this book." Now, I never thought of myself as naive, but I'm asked to coach clients who think these behaviors are acceptable. Can you comment on that?
You know, power has a way to tantalize and fascinate that often comes through the dark side of it. We, you know, humans in general respond more forcefully to negative emotions and events because evolutionarily we have to, right? We have to notice the negative. We have to take it into account. We have to remember it. We have to react to it very quickly, very strongly, with all the flow of emotions. Otherwise, the negative can kill us. So we are kind of wired to be sensitive to the dark side of power. And that's why if you look at the TV shows and you look at the films and you look at how it's covered in just general culture, we often lean on the manipulative, on the coercive, on the nasty, because it's interesting. And so when you write a book on the subject of power that indulges all of those natural tendencies, you're going to sell that book. Now, are you educating people to use power constructively? Not really. For that, you have to understand power in its many, many facets, which include a very positive and potentially impactful version of it that can actually help your surroundings, help your own life in a direction that doesn't make you feel disgusted with yourself for all the things you've done with it. So we conceive of power as energy. It's the energy you need to move, to act, to change things around you. And like every form of energy, it can be a positive force or a negative force. Just like nuclear energy can be used to activate all kinds of wonderful activities of the humans engage in, and it can be used to, you know, throw bombs and kill and destroy in the worst possible way. So you need to understand that power can go in both directions, but in and of itself, it is not inherently evil. And so
Yes.
books that portray the right approach to power as that coercive, Machiavellian way of conceiving of it are only showing you one side. And I would wager that the positive side, the structural side, is actually much more important. It's the one that you don't see. Everything we do is governed by power, but a lot of what we do is perfectly fine. It's completely normal behavior. It's just that we are confused about power only being the nasty version.
So that leads me to your really wonderful commentary on those who use it for good, and it still makes us vulnerable. And you suggest some antidotes. And as I think about clients, I see power use on a continuum. So we've got on one end the very worst. We've got the the diagnosables, I call them, the narcissists and the sociopaths and the unspeakable. And then we've got the people who, maybe they read the book and so they take credit, they grandstand, the me monsters that we can work with and develop, and Maya's work and my work as a coach, um, and they are out there literally in our organizations creating fear and distress and really causing difficulty that we see. But then there on the other end are these people that are afraid of the use of power, and they can be engaging in power for good, and many people who are, and you say that they are still vulnerable to becoming hubristic and self-focused, and you suggest antidotes. Can you talk about those antidotes?
Right, absolutely. So we know a few things about what power does to us. Because power comes from having control over things that people value. I have power over you if I can give you access to something you want that you cannot get easily elsewhere. So you depend on me. That nature of power can easily lead us to believe that we don't need others. If I feel like if I have control over valued resources, I may indulge into the thought that I don't need other people very much. So that has two problems. One is it makes us insensitive to them. We make us inattentive to them. If I don't think I need you, why should I focus on you and try to understand you? I don't need you. So I'll use my abilities, my cognition, my memory to focus on other things. And in addition to making me insensitive to you, it can make me overconfident because I feel that I don't need your input. I don't need you to tell me things. I don't need your knowledge. I don't need your skills because I've got it. I'm in control. I have what I need to move forward. So those two ill effects are always lurking in power. Even in people, and we tell stories in the book of people of that kind who are marvelous human beings. They do their utmost to help others. They go out of their way. They succeed in really having a positive impact in the world. And then, their success starts to go to their head. You start to believe that you walk on water, that all these people around you don't know it as well as you do. And you fall into those kind of traps, the way we think of them. The antidotes are equally clear, thankfully. When it comes to self-focus, you need to really extricate the person from themselves. And so, it's not just about you. It's about all these other people with whom you are highly interdependent. And I'm moving so little that the light in my office I decided to turn off. Now we're going to turn it back on with a little bit of Italian gesticulation, which is one of my greatest skills. So essentially, you have to start to consider other people. So you lose a self-focus by reminding yourself that you are interdependent with a whole lot of others. And by the way, there are some great thinkers who would emphasize the interdependence, not just with other human beings, but with other systems, nature, all beings on this earth, and that becomes even more intensely empathetic. So the first antidote to the self-focus that power tends to engender is this idea of empathy, which is defined as a bit to understand what somebody else is feeling, going through. And you achieve that by reminding yourself that you are interdependent with those people. So don't fall into the trap that you can do it. You don't need anybody because you always need somebody. Nobody can do what they want to do by themselves. You always have a level of mutual dependence with other people. And once you are reminded of it, you will focus more attention on them and that will reduce the tendency to become insensitive. Very important for any leader. So that the empathic engagement with other people that is fueled by a sense that we need each other to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Number one. The second antidote is what you need to counter the effects of this kind of overconfidence, also known as arrogance, where you think you know it all. You don't need input from others. And that's humility. Humility is the simple recognition that we have limitations. Yes, we can be great at some things. We have had many successes, and we can be proud of those things. But from there to assume that you can just forge ahead and only you can fix it, only you can solve the problem, that is obviously a very short-sighted, very limiting view of how to engage with other people and with other people's input. So what we know from research in this domain is that the leader who manifests humility tends to elicit higher performance from the team, higher engagement, higher satisfaction in the team members. So we do better because you're signaling to me that I can contribute to this endeavor because you know what you're good at. You know that, as a leader, you contribute. You still are needed, even when you acknowledge your limitations. So those are the two jewels that help you use power well: this empathic engagement with others and humble taking in of their contributions.
And that is what your research has proven is the case. I love that. You're singing my song. And that's what my work proves is the case. And I love that you say we remind people of that, because most of us, with the exception of those people that are on that far end of that continuum I talk about, can be reminded. Most people have the capacity for that empathy, but they have to be reminded when they get carried away. Don't you believe that is true?
Absolutely. And I would say that Julie Battilana, my wonderful co-author on this book, and I have drawn on the research of many fantastic researchers that have really worked to uncover how these dynamics unfold, the humility, empathy. And both of those qualities are malleable. They're not fixed. Certainly, there are going to be people who have certain skills that come more naturally to them. Just like I could be good at math, but not good at interpersonal kind of nuance. In the same way, there are going to be some people who are very good at detecting what kind of emotions you're feeling in this moment. That's a kind of accuracy that some people have more than others, but everybody can improve. And oftentimes the improvement is a matter of motivation. So as you say, Andrea, when we tell them why they should pay attention, why it's important for them as leaders to keep an eye on those deviations from behavior that they would subscribe to as what to strive for, they can respond, but they have to be motivated. They have to recognize the relevance of these two qualities for their work. And sometimes we get very, very confused because there's an attraction to the idea of the leader as the strong person that comes in from above and tells us, this is where we're going. This is what you should do. Listen to me. I know. And there's a comfort in somebody taking charge, in somebody telling us what to do, making us feel safe because they're protecting us. There's an attraction to that leads them to think that kind of leadership style is actually good. It leads us sometimes to select them as leaders, despite the fact that all the research in this domain tells us the same story. When you let a leader become too full of themselves, too certain that they are it, too impermeable to the input of their team. They don't listen. They boss people around. They don't ever admit that they were wrong. Those should be alarm bells for all of us. And yet we forget. We forget that those are things that should actually absolutely exclude somebody from consideration for a leadership role. And here we are, voting people in like that all the time.
Yes, indeed. Yes. We praise that.
We do.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about sharing power. I listened to a podcast you recently did with Maya on Sonia Senek's show. And something you said that I really want to hear you talk about again, because I know that our listeners and viewers would benefit from this. I talk about this a lot with clients. You talked about two things that your research pointed to that make teams, I don't know if you said productive or cohesive, maybe you can clarify. Two factors. Can you share those? It was about everyone speaking, and can you share those factors?
Sure. This is research conducted by wonderful researchers. One of them is Anita Woolley, Carnegie Mellon, that looked at team performance. They call it collective intelligence, because what they were looking at is the tendency of some teams to perform well no matter what kind of task you gave them. Could be brainstorming, more creative, could be more structured planning. It could be more mechanical, kind of physical skill. They do well. And then there are teams that they do poorly no matter what you ask them to do. And they were trying to identify the primary determinants of this collective intelligence. Also, more simply put, team performance. And they found that there were two, as you mentioned. One is the average level of empathy in the team. So do you have on your team a bunch of people who are observant and sensitive to the emotions that others on the team are feeling? You will see that's a very touchy-feely, bleeding heart approach to teamwork. But imagine a scenario where you're on a call with your team and we are discussing an approach to a problem, and you have been very vocal the first part of the meeting, and then at some point you become quiet. Empathy means that I notice that you turned off, and I follow up. After the fact, I am empathetic enough to know that I shouldn't push you in this moment because you're clearly not happy. But maybe one-on-one later on, I can reach out and say, Andrea, I just noticed I have concerns about this decision. Do you do too? And so all of a sudden we have real engagement. That's what we mean by empathy. Okay. So the researchers found that if you have a number of teammates who display this empathetic accuracy, team performs better. The second factor that they identified is how equally spread out speaking time is. Do we have a couple of people or one person, God forbid, they speak all the time and everybody else is relatively quiet or entirely quiet? Or do we have much more participation? It's much more evenly allocated to everybody on the team. And that's obviously beneficial to performance, because the only reason why we have teams in the first place is that we bring together competencies that a single person doesn't have. So if I could do everything by myself, why on earth would I have a team?
Right.
A team is hard to manage. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of communication complexities. You do it because you need the diverse inputs, and spreading out the speaking time allows everybody to contribute their bit to the work. So those two things are things that are the exact negation of self-focus, because you're paying attention to what everybody's doing, feeling, how they're talking, how they're not talking, who they are really supporting, who they're not supporting. You're very, very attuned to their emotions. And the second one is the humility to listen to what other people have to say, as opposed to coming in. We see this happen. I'm sure in your coaching work, you see this all the time. The leader who comes in already having decided what needs to be done, and they become really impermeable to any deviations from those things. And that's the perfect recipe for not using the team to their maximum ability. You lose out on a lot of competence. a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, a lot of problem solving when you do that.
Yes, and it seems so obvious. You said it. Why have the team? The purpose of the team coming together is to contribute, but yet it is one of the most common things that I talk about with clients. And when I do 360 reviews, I interview people and they talk about, well, she doesn't speak up in meetings, or she doesn't contribute, or she needs to contribute more, or he dominates the meeting and other people can't talk. And people are intimidated because he already comes in with the decision having made. And a long time ago, I learned about a concept called the rule of 2 feet. I don't know if you know about the law of 2 feet, the law of 2 feet, or the rule of 2 feet. And it goes like this: if you're not contributing or learning, move your feet to somewhere where you can do one of the two things. It's like a law for life. And I often share that with people, and they say, whoa, that would limit the number of meetings I go to, because if I'm not either giving something or getting something, but I sit in these meetings where somebody's already made the decision and I'm just sitting there, I'm not giving anything, I'm not learning anything new. And how much of our time do we spend? But if you have equal time, or you're contributing empathetically, that's the rule. That's that rule of 2 feet.
Absolutely. It's another way to get at the same final result, which is allowing everybody to contribute and learn in the process. Mm-hmm. And you're right, it's a two-way street. It applies to everything. You have to give, you have to learn. It's my way of reconceptualizing networking, for instance, which is another one of those activities that often people engage in, forgetting why they're doing it. We become very focused on our little goal, what we want to get out of the networking. And we forget that it's not sustainable unless you are ready to contribute to their goals and you conceive of it as a learning opportunity. Once you do that, once you reframe it as giving and learning, it becomes an energizing activity versus a chore that people take on because everybody's telling them that they have to. It's a burden instead of a addition, right, to your abilities and your performance. So it's the same principles that takes shape in this phenomena in really similar ways. It means we can count on it. This is not, just a law of 2 feet, just empathy and humility, just giving and learning. It's everything we do as leaders and managers is governed by those two imperatives, but we just forget them along the way because we become a little bit concerned about losing ground, losing control, and then we have to control others to feel better about ourselves. And that's why I think some leaders are unable to truly make the most of the input of their team, to truly listen when the team is critical or raises problems. I think it's our need to control. And when we feel vulnerable in our position, in our abilities, we turn into controlling machines to make ourselves feel a little safer.
Well, now you're talking about fear. So at the core of that is fear. Almost always.
Almost always. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So on page 94, you say, one of the chief reasons power hierarchies persist is our tendency to obey authority. And I want everyone listening or watching to pause and let that sink in for a moment. One of the chief reasons power hierarchies persist is our tendency to obey authority. Now, I would like, if you would, Tiziana, to tell us about this modern day Milgram experiment you document in our book. In your book, not our book, your book.
Well, we should write one together. Then we would have our book to talk about.
maybe that was an accidental slip.
That's easy. The psychoanalyst would say, now we know what you really want. Fine by me, Andrew. So yes, the Milgram experiment, very famous, one of the many famous Milgram experiments is the one of the electric shocks, where you have a confederate that is working with you and is instructing an experimental subject to administer electric shocks to somebody in another room, hidden away, when they don't answer questions correctly. And what made it very famous is that people were, really willing to administer horrendous shocks, even though they were hearing this poor experimental subject screaming in pain. When there was a figure of authority, especially that was indicating to them that was their job.
Yeah.
That's what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
There was an experiment that was run in the aftermath of World War II and the Nazi horrors, and the fact that you have a populace that conforms to certain diktats and certain impositions and certain directions, even though individually maybe they are perfectly fine people. So there was a more recent incarnation of this TV show that reproduced this scenario, thinking, well, maybe in modern day, people are now in a different cultural setting. They might be able to see through some of these things and not comply in the same way. And sadly for all of us, the compliance was there in very, very, very comparable ways. And so we appear to not have learned very much. And the part of it is that human nature has not changed. It is true that power, authority, and all of those dynamics take different form in different cultural contexts. Even the role of the manager in certain countries, in certain cultures, the manager is supposed to tell people what to do, is supposed to be bossy. And when they're not, their subordinates don't think that they are doing their job, right? And then we have certain environments, more and more in the Western world, where a manager is supposed to be inclusive, is supposed to be more participatory, capable of having everybody chime in. So you have different incarnations of the idea of authority in different cultures. But we do that experiment and its modern replication that shows the same dynamic indicates that we haven't lost a fundamental need, which is the need to feel protected and safe and avoid uncertainty, avoid doubt, avoid vagueness. When you have a figure of authority that comes in and tells you what to do and relieves you of the responsibility of making decisions, relieves you of the risk and the uncertainty about what happens if I do that. Well, you told me to do it. It wasn't me. It's very reassuring to a lot of us. So we have a tendency to not only accept differences in power and allowing a hierarchy to emerge, but there's a twisted comfort in having somebody in charge that allows us not to be in charge, allows us to kind of be without the burden of making decisions and responsibilities. That, of course, comes alongside with us a desire for autonomy, which we also have. We also like to decide for ourselves how to do the things we do. And that's why in the pandemic, all the work from home that we all engage, most of us engaged in, allowed us to discover the pleasure of autonomy, where we could decide when to work, how to work, with what kind of clothing on, at what time of day. Those are wonderful things. So we do like control over our little life. But in the big uncertainty and risk and danger of the world, it is also very nice to have somebody else telling us what to do. And so we allow them to reduce uncertainty for us. And in exchange for it, we let them tell us what's what and really deprive us of our own judgment in many ways. So you see in some regimes, there's a lot of surveillance. And sometimes it's sold to people in terms of safety. You give up on your own free will, so to speak, because you're going to be regimented. But at the same time, you're going to get a lot of security because somebody's watching and they will protect you from people that want to harm you. So that's a kind of exchange that happens that makes authority quite attractive in a kind of twisted way. On the one hand, we resent it because somebody is telling us what to do. On the other hand, it reassures us and it makes us feel safer. That's why we follow it. And we sometimes very acritically, we stop thinking for the benefit of not having yet another thing that you're responsible for, that you have to judge for yourself in a very uncertain world.
So I'm thinking about a couple things. One, you talk about regimes that monitor and we give it up in exchange. And you use the word regime, but we have those regimes right in our corporations that now let people go work from home, but now we monitor every mouse click and movement of the keyboard. And those are ways that we give up our freedom in exchange for the security of a job or in exchange for being able to work from home. And those things have gotten pretty extreme.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I also think about humility and empathy. And then if we know this about human nature, all the more reason, if we have values, we hold power, we have an obligation to use that power with empathy and humility.
There's no doubt. I mean, Toni Morrison, who was a woman of great wisdom, as well as a marvelous writer, of course, has many sayings that are now classics, so to speak. And one of them is, when you have some power, your job is to empower someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And every leader should repeat that mantra constantly, not only because it makes them a good person, which could be good enough, okay, to allow others to do well, allow others to thrive, but because the collective performance, as that research that we mentioned earlier documents very clearly, our collective performance improves when the powerful leader empowers others. And by empowering, it means you give them resources of value that allow them to perform, that allow them to make decisions based on better knowledge and better information, that allow them to be more clear-minded about where to go and how to get there. All the things that a leader really wants to accomplish, otherwise they wouldn't be even in a leadership position. Leadership is about collective achievement. It's not about individual achievement. If it were about individual achievement, I will remain an individual contributor for the rest of my career and be peaceful because I do my thing. I do it well. Thank you very much. I don't have to talk to all these people. They have all these needs, and now I have to attend to them. And it's like, oh, come on, fend for yourselves and don't wait for me to attend to you. A leader must be willing to attend to all of these others. And I do encounter leaders that do a wonderful job of it. Especially in the pandemic, I was really, really impressed with many executives I had to deal with who really took it to heart, that how their job had become more challenging, but at the same time more important, because they really had to pay attention in a way that was just unprecedented and made them better leaders. So people can do this. It's in us to use power well, but you have to constantly remind yourself, just like any form of discipline, there will be temptation to fall off the wagon along the way. It's true for personal care, as you know, that you want to go to the gym, you want to eat healthy, but there's always that donut staring at you. And power is the same thing, that there will always be the lure of controlling others instead of empowering others, because controlling them is also comforting. That, you know, the leader also faces a lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty. It's very unsettling. And when you have an opportunity to kind of tamp it down, make the uncertainty less overwhelming, it's tempting to use it. But unfortunately, the best way to deal with a risky, volatile world is to let others give you input so that together you do a better job, because by definition, a complicated, volatile world cannot be handled by just one person. And when I talk about regimes, I really mean these centralized power systems where these people think that they can control decision-making from the center. But as the world you're trying to govern becomes more and more complex and dynamic and risky and crazy, it's very difficult for you as an individual at the center to make good decisions on behalf of everybody else. And this is true in a team. In the micro little world of a work team, it applies as much as it applies to an entire economic system in a nation of this world, where too many forces are combining that require the input of many people. And sure, we make mistakes even collectively, no doubt. There are going to be times we don't pull it together, but the chances of an individual leader to be the boss of everything and get it right are low.
Not very good. Okay, so you know that I am completely in sync with you on empathy and humility. I also think leaders have to display courage, and I know you would agree. So I have a client right now whose developmental goal is, I need to speak truth to power. And this is speaking truth to power is an element of gravitas, which is an element of executive presence. And we know it's risky. What advice would you have for someone whose goal is to speak truth to power with your knowledge of power dynamics?
I'm going to have to go back to Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh.
Because we know him for the oratory prowess and the philosophical depth, and his capacity to organize a collective movement that took decades to accomplish its goals. So many, many wonderful things. But the one thing that maybe we don't know as much is that he spoke a lot about the personal development that you require to be able to speak truth to power and push back on the status quo, push back on those kind of power hierarchies that may be squashing you. And he says, you have to develop a sense of somebodyness. Don't let anybody ever tell you that you are no one, because then you will never speak truth to power. You will never think that you are allowed and entitled to be courageous. You have to be strong inside and believe in yourself, believe in your value to find the courage to speak up. Otherwise, you will always second guess your position in this context. What entitles you to speak? Are you good enough to speak? Are you valuable enough to speak? And in my view, the way in which a leader or a subordinate gets to the point when they can, in fact, do that, they see something wrong, they speak. They see something that needs to be changed, they try. You have to be comfortable with yourself and appreciate the good in you. And to accomplish that, there's a lot of kind of input on affirmation, of the work you do on yourself to understand that you have something to contribute. And it may not be only a professional kind of work-related contribution. What we know from the research in that domain is that sometimes affirming your value as a human being in something that is you as a person is sometimes all you need to become more courageous at work. I know I'm a person with a certain moral compass. I know that I'm a generous person to my friends and family. I know that I look out for my community. I go to work, my boss does something that I don't think is appropriate. And because of the value I know I have in this larger setting and in myself, I will find the strength, the courage, as you put it, to do something about it at work. But you have to work on yourself. And that's why I love Maya's book, The Possible
Yes.
Self.
Yes.
Because that book allows you to take a look at yourself, a guided, kind of counseled look at yourself to understand why is it that certain things make me so emotional or make me so unwilling to engage with others, or make me a workaholic that can only think about just running in my professional life without thinking of anything else outside it. There's always a reason, and you have to dig deep to find it. But once you find it, the root cause of those reactions that you have, then you will find the value in you. Then you will find what makes you strong enough to speak truth to power. And I would add, strong enough to share power. Nobody shares power from a position of weakness and insecurity. Nobody. The people who are all about centralizing power and holding on to it are insecure people for the most part. They have something that they need to compensate for. And I'm not even oversimplifying when I say this. You might argue that some of the great, powerful folks in the world don't look insecure because they look so assertive and so certain about what they want to do, and sometimes don't hesitate, right, to use all the means available. What I'm arguing is more aligned with what Maya's book would suggest. Deep down, when you feel the need to be so commanding, so controlling, not to mention the bullies, there's always some problem that you're making up for.
I think this is a perfect place to start to wrap up this conversation, although I think we could speak for another hour, because what you're saying is, I love this somebodyness. Affirming your somebodyness is essential to share power and to speak truth to power. And the fundamental under all of this, in order to show empathy, show humility, you have to be developing yourself. If you're not developed, if you're not self-aware, if you're not showing your emotional if you're not demonstrating emotional intelligence, the power will overtake you if you're given that, or you will allow power to overtake you, one or the other. And that's really, I think, what you're saying.
It's beautifully put, Andrea. And it's a reason why executive coaches are the new hero in my life. We start the book with the story of a woman whose life was transformed by an executive coach.
Yes.
And she made her life mission to bring that level of insight and expertise and self-awareness to women who had experienced major trauma and needed to refine themselves.
Yes.
And it's the work that we all need, and it's a work that everybody who has a measure of power or needs a measure of power and achieves it needs to use it properly in a way that makes them happy with themselves. Because we still focus on the damage that people who use power badly inflict on others, but we have to remind that they inflict it on themselves too. People that use power badly are often unhappy people, and we want them to be happy.
Right.
We want everybody to be happy as much as possible.
This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so happy that you joined us here today, and I would love for our listeners and viewers to read your book, learn more about the topics we discussed. The book is Power for All: How It Really Works and Why It's Everyone's Business by Dr. Tiziana Cacharo. You can get it on Amazon. And for those of you listening or watching, Thank you for being part of this conversation. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button below, or go to my website, whatleadersneednow.com, to see our library of past episodes. Thank you for joining us, and be well.